Ambassador Chen Wei's hands gripped the cold metal podium so hard her knuckles turned white. Around her, the massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed, with 1,000 different voices speaking in 100 alien languages. Above her head, the holographic display showed numbers that made her stomach twist into knots. 847 votes against. Only 3 votes for. 152 abstentions. 300 years. That was how long humanity had been asking, begging, and pleading for a seat at this table. 3 centuries of following every rule, meeting every requirement, and proving themselves worthy over and over again. And now, finally, the vote had come. The answer was clear. The answer was no, but Chen had expected that. Rejection hurt, but humanity had faced rejection before. What came next was something else entirely. Something worse. Councillor Thexvara rose from his seat. The Zenithor was tall and covered in gleaming blue scales that caught the light like polished metal, his 6 eyes fixed on Chen as he approached his own podium. The chamber fell silent. "The matter is not finished," Thexvara announced, his voice echoing through translation devices that made sure everyone understood. "I move for an emergency vote on a new measure. I propose that Earth be permanently banned from ever applying for council membership again." The chamber erupted. Some species cheered. Others gasped. Chen felt like someone had punched her in the chest. This was not standard procedure. This was not how things were done. They were not just saying no. They were slamming the door shut and locking it forever. The human species has shown dangerous expansionist tendencies. Thexvara continued, reading from a prepared statement. They spread across their systems too quickly. They militarize too readily. They are aggressive by nature. We cannot allow such a species into our council. We must protect the galaxy from their influence. Chen wanted to scream. She wanted to list every single atrocity committed by species in this very chamber. The Kryn Collective had built their entire civilization on slave labor from conquered worlds. The Varith Dominion had destroyed 3 planets just because those planets refused to worship their god. The Zenithor themselves had killed billions in territorial wars. But humans were dangerous because they defended a mining colony from raiders one time. The vote happened quickly. Too quickly. There was no debate, no discussion, no chance for Chen to defend her species. The holographic numbers appeared again. The ban passed with overwhelming support. Humanity was officially labeled too dangerous for the Galactic Council. The door was not just closed. It was welded shut. Chen stood at the podium as species began to leave the chamber. Many did not even look at her. Some looked with what might have been pity. Others looked satisfied, like they had just solved a problem. She gripped the podium one more time and activated her microphone without permission. "You have not prevented anything today," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The chamber fell silent again. "You have just decided you will not have a say in what comes next." She left the chamber with her head high, but inside, her mind raced. The trip back to Earth took 3 weeks. Chen spent most of that time reviewing intelligence reports that painted a very different picture of the last 3 centuries. The Council had not been passively observing humanity. They had been actively working against them. Trade agreements that looked fair on paper, but somehow always benefited the other species more. Territory restrictions that forced human colonies into systems with poor resources. Technology sharing programs where knowledge only flowed one direction. Safety regulations that applied only to human ships. Inspection requirements that delayed human cargo for months while alien cargo passed through in days. Humanity had succeeded despite all of this. Human colonies thrived even in bad systems. Human ships were reliable even if they were old designs. Human trade grew even with unfair agreements. And that was exactly what scared the Council. Humanity did not need their help to succeed. Imagine what humans could do if they were not being held back. The ship finally arrived at Luna Station, orbiting Earth's moon. Chen went straight to the Lunar Command briefing room without even stopping to rest. Earth's most powerful leaders were already waiting. President Martinez of the United Earth Government, Fleet Admiral Okonkwo of the Space Defense Force, Economic Minister Petrov, and Director Sarah Shao of the Strategic Development Initiative, intelligence agency that had compiled those damning reports, Admiral Okonkwo started the briefing. She was a tall woman with gray hair and scars on her face from a battle 20 years ago. Her voice was calm, but her words were harsh. Our military situation is poor. Council ships are for generations ahead of ours in technology. Our economy is strangled by their trade restrictions. We are surrounded by species who are either hostile or do not care if we live or die. If they decide to act against us directly, we cannot win a conventional war. The room fell into gloomy silence. Then Director Shao stood up. She was younger than the others, barely 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She projected a star chart onto the wall. It showed the galaxy with thousands of glowing dots scattered across it. 2,847 human settlements, Shao said. 400 light-years of space, mining operations, agricultural worlds, research stations, trading posts, and military bases. The Council thinks we are dangerous now. She smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. Let us show them what we can really do. We do not need their counsel. We will build our own. President Martinez leaned forward. You are talking about creating a rival power structure, an alternative to the Council itself. Yes, Shao replied simply. We invite every species they have ignored, exploited, or failed. We offer real partnership, not the fake equality the Council pretends to give. We build our own trade networks, our own defense agreements, our own technology sharing. We make the Council irrelevant. The debate went on for hours. Some thought it was too ambitious. Others thought it was too dangerous. But slowly, a consensus formed. Humanity would not beg for scraps from the Council's table anymore. They would build their own table. At 3 a.m, as exhausted leaders argued over details, a priority message interrupted them. It was from Proxima Station, one of humanity's oldest colonies. A human freighter called the Bright Hope had been seized by Zenithar military forces. The location made Chun's blood run cold. The ship had been in human-claimed space, nowhere near Zenithar territory. The crew of the Bright Hope, all 15 of them, were being charged with illegal passage through Council-protected territory. Was a lie. It was a provocation. It was the Zenithar testing to see if humanity would fight back or roll over. Admiral Okonkwo looked at the gathered leaders. Her question was simple, but everyone knew it would define everything that came after. Do we comply, or do we respond? The silence stretched for 10 long seconds. Then President Martinez spoke. We respond. We are done complying. Get our people back, Admiral. Use whatever force is necessary. Okonkwo smiled. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a long time to hear those words. Yes, sir. I will bring them home. As the meeting ended and leaders departed to begin the monumental task ahead, Chen stood at the window looking at Earth below. The planet was beautiful, blue and green and white, spinning peacefully in the darkness. It looked small and fragile, but Chen knew better. Humanity had been underestimated before. The Council had made a terrible mistake today. They thought they had removed a problem. Instead, they had created an enemy. And humanity had learned one important lesson in their 300 years of trying to join the Council, playing by someone else's rules only worked if those rules were fair. It was time to make new rules. 6 months had passed. Since the Council banned Earth, 6 months since, Admiral Okonkwo sent her special operations teams to rescue the crew of the Bright Hope. That rescue had not been quiet or diplomatic. 2 Zenithar patrol ships were left crippled and drifting. The Council demanded that Earth's hand over the soldiers who carried out the raid. They wanted trials and punishment. Earth's response was simple. They withdrew from every single Council treaty and convention. No more trade agreements. No more territory restrictions. No more pretending to follow rules designed to keep humanity weak. The message was clear. We are done playing your game now. Across hundreds of human worlds, the most ambitious project in history was beginning. If humanity could not join the Council, they would build something better. Something that actually worked for everyone, not just the powerful. Director Sarah Shao stood in her office on Earth. coordinating the creation of what they were calling the Terran Assembly. It was not just a human alliance. It was an invitation to every species that the Council had failed. The rules were simple: mutual defense, fair trade, equal representation, and genuine democracy. Every member got a vote, and every vote mattered the same. There was only one catch. Current Council members could not join. They had made their choice on the industrial world of Nova Foundry. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb worked 18-hour days on something even more important than politics. Project Leapfrog was the codename, and the goal was simple to say, but incredibly hard to achieve. They needed to match Council technology, and they needed to do it fast. Webb was a short, stocky man who looked more like a mechanic than someone running humanity's most important research program. But his mind was brilliant. He stood in the massive factory complex, watching hundreds of engineers and scientists from a dozen different human colonies work together. The Council had always done things a certain way, following traditional methods and approved procedures. Webb threw all of that out. If something worked, they used it. If something did not work, they tried something else. No bureaucracy. No committees. Just results. On the frontier world of Last Light, Colonial Administrator Amara Osei faced a different kind of problem. Last Light was one of the farthest human settlements, right on the edge of explored space. It was small, only 50,000 people, but it was rich in rare minerals that made it valuable. It was also vulnerable. Essay was a grandmother who had come to Last Light 20 years ago to build a new life. Now, she was responsible for protecting that life, and she knew that Earth's defiance had painted a target on every human colony. The Council could not attack Earth directly. Without starting a war they might not win. But out here, far from help, a colony could disappear and everyone would just shrug. Accidents happen in space. That was the official line that covered up a lot of murders. She stood on the observation deck of the colony's small defense station, watching cargo ships come and go. Most of the traffic was human, but lately she'd been seeing something new. Alien ships. Not Council species, but others. The desperate ones. The forgotten ones. The first species to accept the Terran Assembly's invitation were the Chither. They were insectoid, about the size of large dogs, with 6 legs and compound eyes. Their homeworld was dying from a plague that the Council had studied and then declared economically unfeasible to cure. It would cost too much to develop a treatment, and the Chither were not important enough to justify the expense. So the Council let them die. Humanity offered to help. Human medical researchers were already working on the plague. No promises, but they would try. To the Chither, that was more than the Council had ever done. They sent representatives to Earth and joined the Assembly. The Nerati came next. They were aquatic, living in the oceans of their worlds. Beautiful creatures that looked like dolphins mixed with humans. Council corporations were strip mining their ocean worlds, destroying ecosystems and killing millions. The Nerati protested, but Council law said that non-land areas were classified differently. The corporations had the legal right to destroy the oceans. The Nerati had no legal way to stop them. The Terran Assembly offered military protection and helped the Nerati forcibly remove the mining operations. It was piracy by Council law. The Assembly called it justice. The Nerati called it salvation and joined immediately. The lithoids were the third species and the most unusual. They were silicon-based life, living rocks that moved and thought and felt. The Council classified them as non-sentient resources because they did not communicate in ways the Council understood. This meant mining companies could harvest them like ore. It was genocide with paperwork. Humanity's xenobiologists proved the lithoids were intelligent. They found ways to communicate. The lithoids had been screaming for help for 100 years and nobody had listened. Humanity listened. The lithoids joined the Assembly and brought something valuable: massive mining ships that could crack open, planets to reach rare elements, but trust was hard to build. These species had been failed by the Galactic Order. They had been exploited, ignored, and nearly destroyed. Some were suspicious that humanity was just the Council wearing a different mask. Others worried that the Assembly was too weak to protect them. And old wounds ran deep. The Nerati, and Chithir had fought a war a century ago. The lithoids had been harvested by companies from species now in the assembly. Director Zhao spent weeks meeting with representatives, listening to concerns, and building relationships. It was slow work, frustrating work, but necessary work. Then the council decided to test the assembly's strength. A convoy of ships carrying medical supplies to Chithir space was intercepted by a council enforcement fleet. The lead ship was commanded by Captain Torres, a human veteran. She sent a message to Admiral Okonkwo immediately. "Council ships are demanding we heave to for inspection," Torres reported. "They say it is standard procedure. Permission to tell them what they can do with their procedure." Okonkwo was in the command center on Luna Station. Around her, dozens of officers monitored the situation. Everyone knew what inspection meant. The supplies would be confiscated. The ships would be impounded. The Chithir would keep dying. And the assembly would look weak and useless. "Negative, Captain," Okonkwo said. "Do not provoke them. But do not stop either. Continue on your course. I am bringing the fleet." The next 6 hours were the tensest in human history since the Bright Hope rescue. Okonkwo assembled every available warship and jumped them to the intercept point. 23 human vessels faced off against 37 council ships. The math was not in humanity's favor, but this was not about math. This was about will, court will, broadcast on all frequencies, making sure every species in the galaxy could hear. "This cargo will reach Chithir space. Anyone who believes otherwise is welcome to test that conviction." The council fleet did not move. The human fleet did not move. The convoy sat between them. Seconds stretched into minutes. Minutes stretched into an hour. Weapons were charged. Shields were up. Everyone waited for someone to blink. Then a new contact appeared on sensors. It was massive, 3 times the size of the largest human ship. Sensor officers struggled to identify it until someone recognized the design. It was a lithoid planet cracker, one of their mining ships. But this one had been modified. Armor plating covered the hull. Weapon ports had been cut into the stone surface. And its crew broadcast a simple message in their slow, grinding language that translation software turned into words. "We stand with Terra." Council fleet hesitated. They had expected to face humans. They had not expected the lithoids, whose ships were nearly indestructible by design. The standoff continued for another 30 minutes. Then, slowly, the council ships began to withdraw. The convoy continued to Chithir space without interference. On Luna Station, Okonkwo allowed herself a small smile. They had won this round. But everyone knew this was only the beginning. The council would not forget this humiliation. They would not forgive this challenge to their authority. First blood would come soon. The only question was where and when. Across human space, people watched the recording of the standoff. They saw the council fleet back down. They saw the lithoid ship standing with humanity. They saw that the assembly was real, that it could protect its members. That it was not just empty words and false promises. Applications from other species began to flood in. Small species. Ignored species. Exploited species. Each one had been failed by the council. Each one wanted something better. Director Zhao read through the applications late into the night. So many of them. So much hope. So much desperation. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical thing. They had started something that could not be stopped now. The assembly was growing. The council was threatened. And everyone knew what threatened powers did when cornered. They fought back. 1 year after the ban, the Terran assembly had grown beyond anyone's expectations. 47 different species had joined. Together, they controlled 12% of known space. That was enough to matter. That was enough to be a threat. The Galactic Council watched this growth with increasing alarm. For thousands of years, they had been the only power that mattered. Now, something else was rising. Something built on different principles. Something that made the Council look bad just by existing. Inside the Council, arguments raged. Moderate species urged negotiation. Open talks with the Assembly. Find a compromise. But the hardliners saw any compromise as weakness. They demanded the assembly be crushed before it grew any stronger. The breaking point came when 3 council member species formally requested to leave and join the assembly instead. They were small species, not particularly powerful, but the symbolism was devastating. If council members were abandoning ship, what did that say about the council itself? The hardliners won the argument. The council's response was economic warfare. They declared a total blockade of all assembly space. Every trade route was cut. Every shipment was stopped. Military ships enforced the interdiction with lethal force. The message was clear: surrender or starve. The first month of the blockade was brutal. Human colonies that depended on imported food began to ration. The Chither medical crisis worsened as relief supplies could not get through. The near-ID industrial worlds ran low on raw materials. Member species began to send worried messages to Earth. Some asked if maybe they should negotiate with the Council. Maybe this had been a mistake. Maybe they should not have challenged the established order. Director Zhao sat in her office reading these messages, feeling the weight of hundreds of billions of lives pressing down on her. They were looking to humanity for answers, for hope, for solutions. If the assembly collapsed now, every species that had trusted Earth would suffer. The Council would make examples of them. But Zhao had been preparing for this. Project Leapfrog had been working on more than just weapons. Engineer Webb's teams had developed something revolutionary, a new type of jump drive that worked on different principles than Council technology. It was faster, it was more efficient, and most importantly, it could jump to points that Council blockades did not cover. Webb explained it to Zhao using simple terms. Council jump drives use natural gravity wells as anchor points. We have to use the same points, which means they know where we are going to come out. They can set up blockades, but our new drives can create artificial anchor points. We can jump anywhere. They cannot predict it. They cannot block it. The catch was manufacturing. The new drives were complex. Producing enough of them to break the blockade would take time. Time they might not have. Webb pushed his teams harder, working around the clock. Factories on Nova Foundry and a dozen other worlds retooled their production lines. It was a race against time and starvation. On Last Light, Administrator Osei faced a different crisis. Sabotage had begun across assembly space. Mysterious accidents destroyed supplies. Communications equipment failed at critical moments. And worst of all, violence was breaking out between different species. Old grudges were surfacing. Old conflicts were reigniting. Osei investigated an incident where human security forces were accused of massacring a group of near-ID refugees. The evidence looked damning. Video footage, witness testimony, physical evidence. But something felt wrong. Osei had known the accused soldiers for years. They were good people. Not perfect, but not murderers. She dug deeper, ignoring official reports and doing her own investigation. What she found made her blood run cold. The evidence had been planted. The witnesses had been coached. The whole thing was a setup designed to turn the near-ID against humanity. And when she traced it back, she found Council agents embedded in her own administration. Some of her own staff were working for the enemy. The plot went deep. The Council was not just trying to defeat the Assembly militarily. They were trying to prove that humanity's vision would collapse on its own, that different species could not cooperate, that the old tribal violence would always resurface, that the Council's iron-fisted control was necessary to prevent chaos. Osei exposed the conspiracy. But the damage was done. Trust between species had been shaken. Member governments demanded better security. Some accused others of working with the Council. The paranoia was almost worse than the sabotage itself. Then the Council launched Operation Stranglehold. It was a massive military offensive aimed at destroying the Assembly's industrial capacity. 300 warships jumped into the Nova Foundry system, where Engineer Webb and his teams were producing the new jump drives. It was overwhelming force designed to end the rebellion in a single, decisive battle. Admiral Okonkwo watched the enemy fleet appear on her sensors and felt fear for the first time in years. Her fleet numbered only 60 ships. The math was brutal. 5-to-1 odds. Conventional tactics would fail. The human fleet would be destroyed, and with it, any hope of breaking the blockade. But Okonkwo had not survived 30 years in the military by following conventional tactics. She implemented something called the Swarm Protocol. It was radical. It was dangerous. It treated ships as expendable pieces in a larger game. Human vessels, equipped with the new jump drives, would not fight in formation. They would not engage in traditional ship-to-ship combat. Instead, they would swarm. Jump in, strike, and jump out before the enemy could respond. Attack not to destroy, but to disrupt, disable, and delay. Force the Council. Fleet to fight as individuals instead of as a coordinated force. She also deployed automated weapons. Platforms throughout the system. Mines, drones, missile pods. Anything that could shoot without requiring a human crew. The battle space became a nightmare of overlapping fields of fire. The battle began and immediately descended into chaos. Council ships found themselves under attack from multiple directions at once. They would fire on a human ship only to have it vanish and reappear somewhere else. The automated weapons made it impossible to move safely. Their formations broke apart as ships were forced to maneuver independently. But the cost was terrible. Human ships were smaller and more fragile than Council vessels. When they were hit, they died. Okonkwo watched her fleet shrink on the tactical display. 20 ships lost? 30? 40? The names of the dead scrolled across. Her screen faster than she could read them. The battle raged for 18 hours. It was the longest continuous space engagement in recorded history. Both sides were exhausted. Both sides had taken terrible casualties. But the Council fleet was paralyzed. They had not destroyed Nova Foundry. They had not stopped production of the jump drives. They had accomplished nothing except proving they could be fought. When the Council fleet finally withdrew, Okonkwo counted the cost. 40% of her ships were gone. Over 15,000 human personnel were dead. Nova Foundry itself was damaged, though the factories were still functional. They had won, if this could be called winning, but Okonkwo understood something important. She broadcast footage of the battle to every corner of known space. Not edited. Not cleaned up. The raw reality of the fight. She showed how the mighty Council fleet had been stopped. How they had been bloodied. How they could be beaten. The effect was electric. Species across the galaxy watched the Battle of Nova Foundry and saw proof that the Council was not invincible. 12 more species formally requested assembly membership within a week. The Council's show of force had backfired spectacularly, but as Okonkwo sat in her quarters that night, alone with her grief and guilt, she wondered how many more such victories humanity could survive. They had proven they could fight. They had proven they could win. But the price had been paid in human lives, and she remembered every single name on that list of the dead. Director Xiao came to see her. The two women sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Xiao spoke. The new jump drives are ready. We can break the blockade. We can get supplies moving again. Okonkwo nodded slowly. How long until we have enough drives for the entire fleet? 3 months. Maybe 4. The Council will attack again before then. I know. Another long silence. Then Okonkwo asked the question that haunted her. Was this worth it? All these deaths. Was it worth it? Xiao looked at her friend and answered honestly. Ask me again when this is over. Right now, I do not know. I just know we cannot stop. Outside, the stars shined, cold and indifferent. The galaxy did not care about their doubts or fears. It did not care about the cost of freedom or the price of defiance. It simply existed, vast and uncaring. But within that vastness, something new was being born. Something that might be worth the terrible price they were paying, or might not. Only time would tell. 18 months after the ban, the galaxy had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. The Battle of Nova Foundry had become a legend, spreading through both assembly and council space. The story grew with each telling. A small human fleet defeating a massive council armada. David against Goliath. Proof that the old order could be challenged. Assembly membership had swelled to 73 species. More were applying every day. But success had brought new problems that kept Director Zhao awake at night. The council had responded to their military failure with a campaign of targeted violence. Raiding parties struck vulnerable colonies without warning. Assassins targeted assembly leadership. 3 ambassadors had been killed in the last 2 months. The council never officially took credit. But everyone knew who was responsible. Worse, the council was trying to peel away assembly members one by one. They offered generous terms to species that abandoned the alliance. Technology transfers, trade deals, territory concessions. Everything they had refused to give before was suddenly on the table. All the species had to do was betray humanity and crawl back to the council. Some species were tempted. The pressure was enormous. The violence was constant. And the council was very good at making threats. Sound like reasonable warnings, but what troubled Zhao most was looking in the mirror. The Terran assembly was transforming into something she had not intended. It was supposed to be a partnership of equals. Instead, it was becoming an empire in all but name, with humanity at the center of everything. Species deferred to human judgment. They looked to Earth for leadership. They adopted human systems of governance and human ways of doing things. It was subtle, but it was happening. Zhao saw the irony clearly. They had rejected the council for treating smaller species as subordinates. Now they were creating the same dynamic. She brought her concerns to President Martinez. They met in private, in the presidential residence, rather than an official government building. Martinez listened carefully as Zhao explained what she was seeing. "We are becoming what we claim to oppose," Zhao said. "The assembly is starting to look like the council with different flags." Martinez was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "The difference is, we do not want this. The council designed their system to keep themselves in power. We need to design our system to prevent that." How? Term limits for Earth representatives. Rotating leadership positions. Constitutional rules that prevent any one species from controlling too much. We build the safeguards now, before it becomes too hard to change. It was a good answer. But Zhao knew that good intentions were not always enough. Power had a way of corrupting even the best people. They would have to be vigilant. Always. On Nova Foundry, Engineer Webb had news that changed everything. His teams had finally cracked the manufacturing problem. They could now produce the new jump drives in large quantities. Not just enough to break the blockade. Enough to equip every ship in the assembly fleet. Enough to offer the technology to every member species. Webb presented his findings to the Assembly Council. Representatives from dozens of species watched as he explained the technical details in simple terms. This technology gives us freedom of movement the Council cannot match. We can travel faster, go places they cannot predict, and avoid their blockades entirely. And I am proposing we share it freely with all member species. There was shocked silence. Technology like this was usually hoarded, kept secret, used to maintain advantage. But Webb and his teams had taken a different approach. They had been helped by scientists from a dozen species during development. The breakthrough belonged to everyone. The vote to share the technology freely was unanimous. In one moment, the balance of power in the galaxy shifted. The Council's main advantage, their control of space travel, was suddenly obsolete. But on last light, Administrator SA had discovered something that terrified her. Deep in classified council files that a defector had smuggled out, she found plans for a weapon specifically designed to target human biology. It was a bioweapon that would leave other species unharmed while killing every human. It was genocide in a laboratory, a weapon waiting only for someone to give the order to deploy it. Ase smuggled the intelligence to Earth, using every covert channel she had. When it arrived, it triggered the most intense debate in assembly history. The bioweapon changed everything. This was not about politics or economics anymore. This was about survival. Some voices called for immediate preemptive strikes against Council weapons facilities. Find where they were storing the bioweapon and destroy it before it could be used. Admiral Okonkwo argued for this approach. The military solution was clean, effective, certain, others. argued that attacking first would prove every accusation the Council had made about human aggression. It would justify everything they had done. It would make humanity look like the villains. And it might push neutral species toward the Council out of fear. The decision fell to Ambassador Chen Wei, who had been elected Secretary General of the Assembly 6 months earlier. She stood before the Assembly Council and presented a third option. "We expose this," Chen said, holding up the data files. "We broadcast this evidence across every channel in known space. We show the galaxy what the Council is willing to do. We let them judge." It was risky. Evidence could be dismissed as fake. The Council could spin the story, but Chen believed in transparency. In truth, in letting people make informed decisions, the intelligence was released on all frequencies. Detailed documentation of the bioweapon, laboratory records, test results, orders from high-level Council officials. It was undeniable and damning. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Riots broke out on Council worlds. Citizens demanded to know who had authorized a weapon of genocide. Member species called for investigations. The Council's credibility, already damaged, collapsed completely. The moderate faction within the Council, led by the philosophical Quenter Ascendancy, made a historic decision. They formally broke from the Council and opened diplomatic channels with the Assembly. For the first time, major galactic power acknowledged that humanity's alternative vision might be legitimate. Other moderate species followed. Within days, the Galactic Council had fractured. The hardliners still controlled the majority, but their authority was in question. The old order was crumbling, but the Zenithar Imperium, species that had first called for Earth's ban, was not accepting defeat. Councillor Thexvara appeared in a galaxy-wide broadcast. His message was blunt. Council must authorize a full-scale invasion of human space within 72 hours, Thexvara declared. If they do not, the Zenithar will withdraw from the Council and prosecute this war on our own. Humanity must be stopped before they destroy everything we have built. It was an ultimatum to the Council and a declaration of war to humanity. Admiral Okonkwo's intelligence sources reported that the Zenithar fleet was already mobilizing. 3,000 warships, the largest military force ever assembled. They were not coming to blockade or pressure. They were coming to finish what they had started. Okonkwo called an emergency meeting of military leadership. The room was full of grim faces. Everyone understood the math. The Battle of Nova Foundry had been against 300 ships. This would be 10 times worse. "We cannot win this by conventional means," Okonkwo said flatly. "Even with the new jump drives, we are still outnumbered and outgunned. The swarm protocol worked once, but they will be ready for it this time. So what do we do?" asked General Reeves, commander of the Marine Forces. Okonkwo looked around the room at the officers who had fought beside her for years. "We survive. We make them pay for every inch of space. We show the galaxy that humanity does not break. And we hope that someone, somewhere, decides they cannot let us be destroyed." Oh. It was not a confident plan. It was not even a good plan. It was a desperate plan. But it was all they had. Director Zhao watched the military preparations from her office. The assembly fleet was being positioned. Colonies were being fortified. Civilian evacuations were beginning. Everyone knew the storm was coming. She thought about Chen's question from months ago. Was this worth it? All the death. All the suffering. All the cost. They had wanted a seat at the table. They had wanted respect. They had wanted equality. And the price might be the destruction of everything they had built. But as she watched ships move into defensive positions, Xiao realized something. They had already won in one way. The assembly existed. The idea existed. Even if the Zenithor destroyed every human world, the other species would remember. They would remember that someone had stood up to the Council. That someone had offered an alternative. That change was possible. Ideas once released could not be killed. Even with 3,000 warships, the 72 hours began to count down. The galaxy held its breath as the Zenithor Armada gathered at the edge of human space. 3,000 warships, engines burning bright enough to be seen from light years away. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. the largest military force ever assembled, all focused on one goal: destroying humanity's dream of something better. The Galactic Council met in emergency session. The vote was close, but the hardliners won. They officially authorized the invasion. Their statement was carefully worded to sound reasonable. They were not trying to destroy humanity. They were simply enforcing galactic law and restoring proper order. The fact that restoring order meant burning human worlds was not mentioned, but something unexpected happened. The Quinter Ascendancy, which had broken from the Council weeks earlier, made a formal announcement. They were allying with the Terran Assembly, and they were deploying their fleet to defend human space. The Quinter were not as numerous as the Zenithor, but they were old and wise and powerful. Their technology was some of the best in the galaxy. Their ships were works of art, beautiful and deadly, and they had made a choice that changed everything. Other moderate council species followed. The Viridian Commonwealth sent ships. The Crystalline Collective sent ships. The nomadic flotillas, who usually stayed neutral in everything, sent ships. Within hours, the political map of the galaxy transformed. There were not two sides anymore. There were three: the Council hardliners, the Assembly and its new allies, a neutral species desperately trying to stay out of what was becoming a galactic civil war. Director Zhao worked around the clock to formalize the new
alliance.
Treaties had to be written. Command structures had to be established. Supply lines had to be coordinated. It was chaos, but it was necessary chaos. Any crack in the unity would be exploited by the enemy. Engineer Webb retrofitted ships as fast as his teams could work. Every vessel in the fleet got the new jump drives. Every weapon system was upgraded with technology shared by their new allies. Humanity had finally achieved something they had wanted for 300 years: technological parity with the great powers. But it had come at the cost of an invasion that might destroy them all. Administrator Say evacuated civilians from Last Light and a dozen other frontier colonies. There were not enough ships for everyone. She made impossible choices about who left first. Families with children, the elderly, the sick. But thousands would remain, either by choice or necessity. They would face the Zenithar fleet with nothing but hope and determination. Ase watched the last evacuation ship depart and then returned to her office. She was staying. Someone had to coordinate the colony's defense, and she had lived here too long to abandon it now. If Last Light fell, at least she would fall with it. Then the Zenithor invasion began. But they did not start with a direct assault on major human worlds. They started with terror. Colonies across the frontier went dark. Communications ceased. When relief forces arrived, they found horror. Entire populations executed. Buildings destroyed with deliberate cruelty. Evidence of torture and experimentation. The Zenithar were not just trying to win. They were trying to break human morale. They wanted Earth to see what was happening and surrender to stop the suffering. The strategy backfired completely. Humans had a long history with this kind of evil. They had seen it on their own world in their darkest times. And they had learned that you never surrendered to such enemies. You fought them until there was nothing left to fight with. But the terror campaign had another effect. Species throughout the assembly saw what was happening and recognized it. Many of them had suffered similar treatment from council members in the past. The Chither remembered the plague that the council let spread. The Nereidi remembered their oceans being destroyed. The Lithoids remembered being harvested like minerals. They saw their own history reflected in humanity's suffering. And they understood that if the Zenithor could do this to humans, they could do it to anyone. The atrocities did not divide the assembly. They forged it into something unbreakable. The final confrontation came at Earth itself. The Zenithor Armada, reinforced by hardliner council forces, jumped into the Terran system with overwhelming strength. 5,000 warships. The combined human and allied fleet numbered only 1,800. The math was brutal. Admiral Okonkwo commanded from the bridge of the TAS Unity, humanity's first true dreadnought. It had been built in secret over the past year, using assembly resources and cooperation. It was massive, powerful, and represented everything the Alliance stood for. Different species working together to create something none of them could have built alone. The battle began in the outer system and immediately spread across three dimensions of space. Ships jumped in and out, striking from unexpected angles. The new human tactics, mobile and adaptive and unpredictable, turned the orderly battle plan into chaos. But the Zenithor had learned from Nova Foundry. They adapted. They spread their fleet out. They used their numerical advantage to cover multiple areas, and they focused fire on the Unity. Recognizing it as the command ship, the Dreadnought shook as weapons fire hammered its shields. Okonkwo gripped her command chair and barked orders. The Unity's main guns fired, each shot powerful enough to cripple a cruiser. Around her, human and allied ships fought with desperate courage against overwhelming odds. Then the Unity took a catastrophic hit. A Zenithar battle group had coordinated their fire, and multiple heavy weapons struck at once. The shields collapsed. The hull breached. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. "Admiral, we need to evacuate," her XO shouted over the noise. "The ship is lost." Okonkwo looked at the tactical display. The battle was at a critical point. If she abandoned the Unity now, the command structure would collapse. But if she stayed, she would die when the ship exploded. She had seconds to decide. "All hands abandon ship," she ordered. "Transfer fleet command to the Quenter flagship. Tell Admiral Severith to keep fighting." She stayed on the bridge until the last escape pod had launched, then ran for her own pod. The Unity died behind her, its reactor going critical and taking a dozen Zenithar ships with it in a massive explosion. But the battle continued. As ships burned and died on both sides, something unexpected happened. Neutral species made their choice. They had been watching, trying to stay out of it, hoping the war would end without them. But as they watched the Zenithar atrocities, watched the desperate defense of Earth, watched a galactic order willing to use genocide to maintain power, they could not stay neutral anymore. Dozens of species entered the fight, not necessarily joining the assembly, not making formal alliances, but refusing to let genocide happen in front of them. Their ships jumped into the Terran system and engaged the Zenithar fleet. The Zenithar found themselves suddenly surrounded. They had expected an easy victory against an outnumbered enemy. Instead, they were fighting half the galaxy. Their formation broke. Their coordination failed. And slowly, impossibly, they began to retreat. The invasion fleet withdrew in chaos, leaving behind thousands of dead and dozens of crippled ships. They had achieved nothing except proving what the Assembly had been saying all along. The Council's authority was built on fear and force, and when enough people refused to be afraid, that authority crumbled. The aftermath of the Battle of Earth was both tragic and hopeful. Human casualties were staggering. Over 800,000 dead, military and civilian combined. Colonies destroyed. Ships lost. An entire generation scarred by war. But the old Galactic Council formally dissolved 3 days after the battle. The hardliners retreated to their own territories, bitter and diminished. They would cause problems for years to come. But they would never again dominate the galaxy. The moderate species and the Assembly formed a new body, the Free Galactic Alliance. It had rotating leadership. Every species had one vote. Decisions were made democratically, not by whoever had the biggest fleet. It was messy and slow and full of arguments. But it was fair. 5 years later, Ambassador Chenwei addressed the inaugural session of the Alliance Parliament. She was older now, with gray in her hair and new scars on her soul. But she stood proud as she looked at the representatives of hundreds of species gathered in the new chamber. Humanity held one vote among many. Exactly what they had always wanted. "We did not fight to replace one empire with another," Chen said, her voice clear and strong. "We fought so that no species would ever again be told they were unworthy of having a voice." The Council banned Earth from their order. So we built something better. Not ours, but ours together. And that has made all the difference. The Parliament erupted in applause. Different species making different sounds, but all expressing the same sentiment: hope pride, unity. On Earth, Director Zhao visited the memorial wall in Geneva. It listed the names of every human who died in the war for recognition. All 847,000 of them. She traced her fingers over names she recognized. Friends, colleagues, people who had believed in the dream enough to die for it. Representatives from 70 species stood with her. The Chither, whose plague had been cured with human help. The Nereidi, whose oceans were being restored. The Lithoids, who were recognized as people instead of resources. Each species had paid their own price for freedom. Engineer Webb received the Alliance Medal of Honor for his work on Project Leapfrog. He accepted it with typical gruffness. "I just built what needed building," he said. Then, more quietly, "I wish fewer people had to die for us to get here." On Last Light, Administrator Asay watched children play in the rebuilt colony center. Human children. Chither children. Nereidi children. Dozens of other species who would grow up in a galaxy where their worth was not determined by which species had the biggest guns. They laughed and played together, unaware of the war that had been fought for their future, unaware of the cost, and maybe that was okay. Maybe that was the point. They would grow up in a better galaxy and they would never know how close it had come to never existing. Admiral Okonkwo, retired now, stood on the observation deck of a civilian station and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, the hardliners were plotting. Somewhere out there, old prejudices still existed. Somewhere out there, people suffered under unjust systems. The work was not finished. It would never be finished. Building a better galaxy was not something you completed. It was something you worked at every day, one small choice at a time. But for the first time in 300 years, humanity had a voice in that work. A real voice. An equal voice. And they had helped create something that might, just might, be worth all the terrible things it had cost. In the old council chambers, abandoned now, dust settled on empty seats. The galaxy had moved on. In the new parliament, debates raged over trade policies and territory disputes and 1,000 other issues. It was chaotic and loud and messy. It was also free, and that made all the difference. The Age of Empires was over. The Age of Alliance had begun, and humanity, banned and broken and written off, had helped build it. They had been told they were not good enough. They had proven otherwise. Not through force alone, but through the radical idea that everyone deserved a seat at the table. That cooperation was stronger than domination. That the future belonged to those willing to fight for something better than the past. The stars shined on, cold and eternal. But among them something warm was growing. Not perfect, not finished, but real and worth every sacrifice it had taken to create.